So nice to see you here this morning and continue of our lectures that I started last night about us as humans and why we get sick. I call these lectures the law of life or the mystery of life, and we have to understand the way that God has created us so that we can answer the question why sickness comes. If we don't have a clue how the human being functions, we cannot handle him. We cannot do anything if there is no clear understanding of the human structure, the way he was built. This is why I started with the case last night, but I bring up another case of a young woman. She is only 30 years old, and she got, about 3.5 years ago, she got a disc failure in her cervical spine, which went to her left side. And after half a year after this disc failure, she got severe pain in her mandibula, of both sides, the left side stronger than the right side. And then she got, a year later, infections of her ear canals on both sides. And then she got, a year later, a severe acne on her back. And the question is, why is this lady sick? Why does she have these problems? Can there be healing for her? Like I said to this gentleman who has this autoimmune disease, the thrombosis, the kidney cancer, can we approach him and say, look, this is the cause of your disease. If you remove the cause, the diseases will stop going on. That's why I started with the settings that life is under law. Everything in life is under law. And if we are inside the law, nothing wrong can happen to our lives. It's only when we are outside the law that disease and death comes. You see, one day when, by God's grace, we will be in His presence, who is the law of life, then how many diseases will we have? And how long will our life last? It will last forever, because we are never going out again on the law of life. So this is so important that we know that our life is under law. A changeable law or unchangeable law? So it's never changeable. You see, when God once says something and He did it, there is no change in it, because God never has an idea that He says, well, I did this, but it was not right. I have to correct myself. God never has such a thing. That's why everything He does remains as it is. If it's not damaged, I mean, the way He put it to function. This is why we have to understand the laws of life are never changeable. So, to fight against these laws, is there any, will it help us to fight against the laws? Yes or no? No, because we are put in the law. We are not outside, and we can never walk outside this law. That's why the first thing in life, we have to understand the difference of us and God. And we started to explain this, showing that the smallest unit of life is the cell. And we show that the cell is a well-made machine that's so complicated that we don't know how it functions entirely, and even, I think, in eternity, now 1,000,000 years later, or 1,000,000,000, we will still find things in the cell that we didn't see before. Because God's way to create things is an infinite one. And for us as finite beings, it's just not going to, we will always find new things in the cell. So the cell is very complex built, but even so complex that it is, it has no life in itself. Yes, it is alive, but life is outside of it. Life must be imparted to it all the time. That's by what we call the basic need, or the energy that comes outside of everything that we have on earth. So the life of a cell, the life of humans, and even the life of everything that exists on earth has not the power in itself to live. That is only God. Every created being, and we are creatures by this fact that we have no energy in ourselves. We have to take life's energy outside of ourselves and imply it to us so that we can live. So the first law of life is that life is dependent. I mean, it's such a simple thing. And if in medicine we would just recognize this one law, we would get a lot of answers why this gentleman or this lady with 30 years is sick. We would get a lot of answers. So, the life is dependent. Can the cell choose its basic need? Or has the cell any intelligence or choice? Now we must see that the cell has never a choice. Would your car have a choice what it drives? Yes or no? No. So the cell is like a car. The cell is like an instrument. It has no choice of its own. If it gets in its close aroundness that it can take what it needs, then it's everything fine. But if it has not, then it will be destroyed. Because there will never be a human cell that will lack oxygen and still live. There will never be a cell a human cell that needs carbohydrates and don't have it, or yes, all the nutritions in it, that it then says, well, I take something else. It will not be possible. So the cell has no choice. If you keep this in your mind, that the cell has no choice, then it will help you a lot in this seminar. And the second idea of life is dependent. If the energy of life comes from outside of life, then also the damage of life can only come from outside of life. Imagine the car, can it ever damage itself? No, nothing on earth damages itself or is able to damage itself because it's made to function. It can only be damaged from outside. So when a human being is sick, we have to know that his damage comes from outside the cell. His sickness is always a cell sickness. But the damage of the cell is not from the cell itself. So it's not the genes that make us sick, but that which gives the gene the command to produce the cancer or to produce the autoimmune reaction or whatever a reaction in the body. It's not the cell or the gene that is in control of life. The control of life is outside of it. That's why when a person comes, I look to him and I see, is he beaten? Are his cells damaged by pressure, or are his cells damaged by temperature? And I don't find that then I go and say, okay, then it must be damaged from another energy. So that's why I then come and say, so what are the basic needs? What gives power to the cells that they function? And we see that we have seven basic needs. Yes, isn't that interesting? That's 7 basic needs that we have. And these 7 basic needs govern life. And the one that is the spiritual information, the thought, we have never discussed in medicine what does a thought bring to the cell. Yes? So we know that we need oxygen, water, food, temperature, sleep, sunlight. But what is love for the cell? What kind of a relationship is there between a thought and a cell? And that's why I came to understand that in the history you will see of this gentleman and of this lady, we find that it's only his spiritual understanding of the things that kills his cells. So that's why, how can an experience, and you might remember, I once think I told you the story about this lady that is in her 40s, and she had a daughter, and her daughter was killed by an abuser in a very terrible way when the daughter was 11 years old. And that happened 6 and 8 years. The lady came to see me twice, 6 years later and 8 years later. Now, how is this lady's health? A good health or not a good health? So her body is damaged. But if that event never happened, what would have been to her body? She would have been a healthy woman. So it's an event that takes place outside of herself, and it damages her body. How can it be? How can it be that an event that doesn't touch my genes, that doesn't touch any of my bodies, but it destroys my own body just by thinking? You see, we have to see this relationship, which is the most basic relationship we ever have to understand. So someone kills my child, and it's not the killer who dies, it's not the killer who gets sick, but me who have lost a child. Is that fair? Yes or no? That's not fair. But it happens every time the same way. So this is where I come to the place where I said, this must be under a law. There must be a definite function. There must be a law why a thought can kill the body. And if there is no law, it cannot happen that it kills the body. This is why I went with you last night to the organs that fill up the need. So we have the lungs that fill up the need of oxygen, we have the stomach and intestine that fill up the need of food and water. We have the skin, the brain, and the eyes that fill up those needs that we have. But who fills up the need of love or of spiritual information for the genes? Who is that? And so we entered into the brain, into the human brain, and we found out that we have in the human brain 2 units. I mean, once we have 2 brains, yes, the left brain and the right brain, which have no connection on anatomic level with each other, and we will see who unites them to one. Page, please. piece. And then we have the cortex, and from the cortex we know only nerves go into the body, and they come into the limbic system, and we know in the limbic system we have the chemistry unit where the chemistries are made, which are then given to the blood and go to the whole system, like an information of what comes through the nerves to the limbic system. And of course the nerves follow on and go to each bone, and not bone only, but to every muscle that we have is conducted from the cortex. And of course, last night I didn't tell you that we have not only this nerves going out, but we have on each side how many cranial nerve? Does anyone know how much cranial nerve we have on each side? Yes or no? So can anyone guess, if God is the creator, how much nerves would he put on each side? 7. Well, you're almost there. But how many are there? There are not 7. How much is it? 12. 12, yes. Is there in nature anything that has much to do with 12? Yes or no? A lot has to do with 12. Yes? It's not it's just another proving that when God created humanity, he thought about how to do it. And he didn't do one nerve more or less. Yes? So on each side, on the cranial nerve, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. Yeah? So we have on both sides the 12 cranial nerves that go and command the upper part, and of course the very important organs that are the heart is from the cranial nerve. You know which cranial nerve commands the heart? It's on the biggest nerve, the longest also one that goes until our stomachs. It goes, yes, that's the 10th work, the vagus. Have you ever heard from vagus? Vagotonus, or yeah. So the vagus goes. He does a big thing. He's the biggest one, I think. In the human being, he does one of the most things. Yeah, the cranial. So the cranial nerves are here, and they go and cover mostly the same side, but they also go across each other sometimes, and so. But we don't need to go into these details. However, the question is, where does the thoughts come from? Who brings love into the brain? And in which part? Since we have thinking and thoughts only up in the cortex, of course we have to search in the cortex the place for that. And I tried to show you last night, and we didn't finish this idea of proving that there is a spirit or a mind that is not an anatomic or an atomic issue. Yes, you know, the cells are what? The cells are material, and all materials have which basic component? Atoms, yes? Atoms. But the spirit and the mind is not an atom. Yes, it cannot be an atom. It's something different than an atom. It's not possible to be seen, but its result is possible to be seen. So the spirit and the mind, how can we know that in human being there are not only cells? Well, just by the capacity to think. But you see, in medicine we all think, or we are taught, that because the cortex is so complex, we think through the complexity of the cortex. But in fact, how much can we wait for this tree to start to be complex and see if he gets out a thought or gets out a word? How long have we to wait? You see, DNA can never speak. DNA is a program, but it can never utter a word, and it can never utter an idea. The cell and atoms have no consciousness, even though you put 100,000 or a millions or a billions together and connect them in the most different kind of way. Let's see if they ever can get out something what they are not. You know, material can only produce material. It's not possible in our world that we have to make any experiment that we can get out that something material cannot get something that is immaterial. All that is material gets material, but nothing gets immaterial. Yeah? The only thing that we cannot grasp is the energy. Yes? The energy is not material. But that's also something, and I don't go too far into these things. But however, the capacity to think must be done by a spirit. And I showed last night that we have a conflict or a contradiction in the human purpose. So the cells in us want to live. They make feelings of hunger and thirst and pain and tiredness, because the cell shows it has a need and it wants to get out of that need because it wants to live. But we have in the human being the other idea that life is not so important than things like freedom or righteousness or truth. And I found out that in my patients, I have not one patient, and I had my practice, but I was traveling a lot in these last years, and I saw in these last 8 years at least 20,000 patients. And with all I spoke, none was living for life. And if I would speak to you, you would testify the truth that you are not living for life. You want more out of life than just to live. Because if we want only to live, we would sit in a place and just feed and drink, you know. We do not want more than life. But the human being has a spirit that has higher interest than just life. And this higher interest is the purpose or the sense of life. And the only thing that gives meaning to life is love. And that was very surprising for me to see in my patients that they are searching for love. So if we have a conflict in us, if the spirit wants not to eat, but the body asks for food, who wins? Are the feelings ever be able to force us to do something or not? Think about it. You see, feelings are only beggings. The body begs the spirit. Yes, the body sends a message that the spirit or the mind interprets as a good feeling or a bad feeling. Yes? And then, since the spirit is in charge of the whole system, must hear, but he must not hear. He can choose. A cell has no choice. It must do the feeling of hunger if you don't give the food. But the spirit, he can choose and he can say, well, let's see. What is more important? And if he does not get his need first, then he is not willing to give life or to give the energy that needed to itself. That's why, let's put this down, all feelings and all emotions are just beggings. They are results of what we think, and they are the expression of the self. They are not the expression of the mind. The cell answers through feelings. The origin of feelings is the cell. And the origin of, not of thoughts, in reality we will see this, but on thinking, the capacity to think is only the spirit's attitude, the spirit's possibility. And so we have these two things in human being, and they are coming from two different origins. That's why we must be two in us. But I have now the second proving for the human being that it has a spirit, and that's the question, who is leading? Who is leading the human being? The thoughts or the feelings? Who is in charge of the human being? The selves or the spirit? Yeah, so are you all, you agree? And sometimes people stay here a little bit and think, but of course it's the spirit and the thought that are stronger and leading the self. The only thing the cell can do is to make a feeling, and if the tolerance is over, then the cell quits her job and then she dies. Yes, when we have a stroke or something, then we don't have a connection anymore, so the spirit cannot lead that leg anymore because there is no connection to that leg. So the body just quits its job, but it cannot force. It cannot lead on. The cells are just like a car. They are driven. They cannot say, well, I want to take this road now. And you are the driver, but I decide to drive the other way. That's not possible. That's why it's so important for us. The thoughts are leading out the human life. And of course, the feelings come and demand. And if the spirit does not agree to the demand, then the feelings can go as long as they want. They will never be fulfilled. So important to know the relationship between both of them. But now the most important proving that we have a spirit is, what are thoughts? What are thoughts? To the cell. What are thoughts to the cell? What are thoughts to the cell? Do you understand the question? Is this an English understand question? Yes? So what are thoughts to the cell? What are they? Now, this is the most important question. And this is the most important thing that we have to understand. So, let's see again what we said about what kind of energy leaves from the cortex into the body through the nerve. What kind of energy? So it's electrical energy. So it's electricity. So who makes the electricity in the cortex? So that electricity goes from the cortex. Who produces the electricity in the cortex? Who makes it? No. Pardon? No. You see, that what produces electricity in the cortex is the mind. It's the thoughts in connection to the body gives electricity to the body. And we have good quotes in the Spirit of Prophecy. When I first wrote that, Ellen White wrote that the thinking man produce electricity in their brain by thinking. I was astonished. I never learned such a thing. Any medical here that learned that thinking produces electricity? Have you ever learned that? Yeah? Oh, it's good. You see, we produce electricity through the connection of the mind with the body. And this producing electricity is imparted to the whole being. How many cells need electricity to function? Every cell, if it's a human cell or a tree cell or an animal cell, every cell needs electricity to start to function. You see, when we put a seed into the soil, the first thing that to that seed needs to be imparted, you know what it is? It's electricity. And that is coming from God. I don't know where that electricity comes to that for the cell, but I believe that's from God. But it's without electricity, nothing can start in the cell. That's why it's so important to understand what are the thoughts for the cell. If the thoughts produce electricity, so what are then the thoughts for the cell? It's life-giving energy. Have you ever heard the word that Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone, but by what? But by every word. Do you ever think that life is sustained or is given by this or by this? By what is life given? That it is sustained by oxygen, water, food, and so that we know. But what gives life? Give oxygen life? Does water give life? Yes or no? Of course not. The only thing that gives life is God. And it is His Word. And the Spirit understands the Word and imparts it by thinking to the cell. It's very simple. So thoughts are life energy. And we've said that every energy to the cell comes from where? From outside. So the spirit and thoughts must come outside the cell. They cannot be produced by the cell. If they bring energy, if we think a thought up here, and we can do this in the laboratory, if we think here an altruistic thought, what happens in our limbic system as a result of that? Who is turned on? So here comes the electrical thing, it comes onto the limbic system, and there in the substantia nigra or in those thalamus and hypothalamus, wherever the location is, the cell is turned on to produce endorphin and dopamine. And what does this to us? What kind of feeling? Good feeling. You see, a thought promotes a production. Without that thought, no production of endorphins. Nothing happens. Of course, when the thought comes and initiates the gene to produce the endorphin, what does the cell need to produce the endorphin? It needs oxygen, it needs water, it needs carbohydrates. Yes? It needs to have the right temperature. It needs to have all that, but that's just on the second level of functioning. So the initiation of our good productions of endorphins and feelings is by the thought. So the thought is energy to the cell. And it's the most important energy because the genes are turned on by what we think. Yes?
What about breathing?
Breathing? Breathing is... I have not understood the question about breathing.
Well, just because you had mentioned thought drives, like I don't consciously think about breathing all the time, you know?
Yes, of course. That's why the breath is not necessary to be consciously. But it's still the spirit that keeps it up. Yes? So let us look a little bit into the Bible, because we are here in this Bible study. On what two things did God create human being? What was the two elements He created the human being? Were it more than two elements? Or was it only two? So there were only two elements. How does it then come that we think that human being is three elements? Where comes the idea that the human being is three elements? Yes? You see, in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, we find the description of how God built the human being. It is verse 7, chapter 2, 7. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So how many things the human being is created of? It's only two. But you see, there came in confusion later in the Greek philosophy. And this confusion will bring a lot of problems, and brought already a lot of problems, especially in the religious world. And that is, you see, God took human being, and you know that our cells are what? They are dust. Yes? When did they become alive? When they came together with the breath. Before the breath of life, how much life was in the human body that God formed? 0. So you see, the life of the cell of the body comes by the Spirit, by the breath of life, which becomes then in human his mind or his spirit. And that's only in the cortex, because here everything in us is commanded. And because we have the Spirit, He connects wireless the two brain cortexes. That's why we think like we are one, even though we have two cortexes. And we need two. God thought something when He built us like this. So, but the Spirit or the mind is the one that brought the life. And so we have in the cortex two things. We have cells, yes, the dust of the earth, and the spirit. What does they make together? They make the soul, or life. It's one and the same thing, soul and life. So you see, two things make the third. But now, what did the devil change in all this equation? What did he change? He made the soul what? An entity of its own. That's why people think that we are three. But we are only two. We have a spirit and cells that's in the cortex. There is the mixture, it's only there. So we can call the cortex, we can call soul, because here is life. But what is under the cortex? What is under the cortex? What element? Just cells. Just cells. Yes, so under the cortex we have only cells. That's the body. That's only body. Here we have body and mind together, which makes the soul, the life. So when is life over? When is life over? In medical terms, when do we say that life is over? When we find no electricity, where? In the cortex. When we find no electricity in the brain, then we say life is over. So what happens when there is no electricity anymore in the brain? What happens with the spirit of man? What happens with him? He's gone. You see, he brings electricity, and when he goes, electricity is gone. And how much of soul is over? Left. How much of soul do we have? Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Because it's like water. Water has two elements. And they give a third element. But the elements in the water does not lose their identity. That's why the spirit does not lose its entity if it comes together and combined with the cell. So this is an important thing to understand for us, that there is a part that we can call soul. That's the human being. It's not something invisible, the soul, because the soul is a combination of matter, yes, cells, and spirit. The spirit cannot be seen. That's why when we make an MRI, how much spirit do we see? We don't see spirit. We just see the result of what the spirit does there. But we don't see the spirit. This is why we have to understand, when we speak of soul, then we speak on the combination of two, not on something invisible. Because the soul is the human being itself, but since life is only in the cortex, not in the rest of it, the rest of it is just parts of that life. Yes, you can cut down your arm. Do you still live? Yes, you cut down you still live. Yes, as long as your brain gets what it needs, you are still alive. So I hope that this is well done into your mind. I will give you another few Bible verses on the human structure so that we understand that the soul is not a unit of itself. It's a small difference, you know. It's a small difference. But this small difference will prove us to be healthy if we understand it, if the structure is well understood. So we come up to Proverbs. One of the best doctors that we have in the Bible is Solomon. If we would take Solomon as a medical instructor for the doctors today, we would be better doctors. Solomon knew the structure of the human being. Let's see in Proverbs 20, he writes in 27, Proverbs 20, verse 27, "The spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, searching all the inward parts of the belly." So, what is the spirit or the breath of the Lord in man? It's a light. You see, we could never see anything without the Spirit. We could never feel anything. We could not hear anything, because it's the Spirit that receives all this information from the body and interprets them and gives them an understanding. So, in my German translation, and we might look to the original, what is meant by searching all the inward parts of the belly, that means the spirit of man searches every part of the body, that it is in every part of the cell. Not that the spirit is in the limbic system or in my knee, but since the knee is represented in the cortex, the spirit fills up everything that is in the body. That's why nothing that happens in the body is not directed. It's not by chance. You see, the thrombosis of that person on his left leg is not by chance in the left leg. It's not just a happening. It's a program starting from the right side of its limbic system. It's not by chance which lung you get an embolia. The embolia of the right lung comes from the left hemisphere of the cortex. I mean, it starts here, but it is done here as a result that something here up is not correct and right. So nothing in the body happens by chance. It's the Spirit of the Lord. It's the spirit of man that God gave through breathing it in. So when is man death? Let's see a New Testament verse in James 2. There's a nice thing how James, in a small thought, explains a very nice thing. He says in James 2, verse 26, "For as the body without the spirit is" what? Dead. So who gives to the body life? It's what God breathes in his nostril. But what gives to the body life? It is the Spirit. So, for as the body without the Spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. He just makes a comparison, but it's nice. He makes the comparison of something that is not changeable. The body is dead without the Spirit. The mind brings life's energy to the body. And we know it from creation. By creation, when God breathed in, then the body became alive. And when God takes out his spirit, his breath, then what happens with the body? He is dead. So we know this is very nice explained also in not the Proverbs, but in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of the best books that we have in the Bible. I mean, all are very good, but Ecclesiastes teaches us a lot of the human being and structure. And we can find there I call Ecclesiastes the dissertation of Solomon. It's dissertation work. It's his PhD work that he did. It's Ecclesiastes. It's his studies. And then he says here in verse 7 in chapter 12, "Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it." So that's what happens by death. When we die, we only die When the spirit separates from the body, then the body is just death. But the soul is also death, because the soul is just the two of them. If you take out oxygen of water, how much water do you have? None. You just have oxygen and hydrogen. Yeah, that's those two. So that's what we have to understand. So this is most important human structure that we have to know from the Bible. So the thoughts are to the cell life energy. I have one more idea. I can write it here for a proving that the spirit is something else than the body, and that is thoughts. How much can we put thoughts into a bottle? How much thoughts can we put into a bottle? Can we or can we not? Can we put love into a bottle? Can we? No. Why not? Why can we not put love into a bottle? It's not material. You understand? It's just energy, just not material. That's why thoughts have how much atom in itself? How much atoms are thoughts? None. They have no matter. They have no matter. So that's why if thoughts have no matter, so that's why they must come. If they would come out of the cell, would they be matter or not? Yes or no? If they would come out of the cell. Everything the cell produces is matter. Yeah, everything the cell produces is matter. You can put it in a bottle. Yeah, every hormone, can we put hormones into a bottle? Yes or no? Yes. Everything that is produced by the cell, we can put into a bottle. But we can never put into a bottle the thoughts, because thoughts have no matter. Is that right in English? Matter? Yeah. Okay. Good. Now, the organ that is most important, and I was trying to demonstrate you that we have in human being, is the spirit or mind. So what must then be the most important part of the human being? What must it be? The spirit. But where does the spirit meet the body? Well, the mind is thinking, but what is the place the Bible tells the spirit meets the body? We have written that, we have seen that life comes into the being when the spirit comes in, yes? And the question is, where does life begin then? Where is the connection between the spirit and the body? If life begins when they both connect, then where must be the place where everything comes from? It must be that, but where is that place? Where is the Bible describing the place where the issues of life come from? From the heart. So you see, the Bible says, keep thy heart with how much? It says here in chapter 4 in Proverbs, I read from verse 20 so that to see the whole context. My son, attend to my words, incline thine ear unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Which eyes? We'll see that. Keep them in the midst of thine, what? Of thine heart. Where should we keep what? The words, what are words? Are they spirit or are they matter? Words. Words are spiritual. Yes, words have no matter. Words are spiritual. And we have to keep the words in the midst of the heart. For they are what? Look at this. What are they? They are life. So what are thoughts? What are words? They are life. And every word we read must become a thought to be imparted to the body. You understand it? Every word must become a thought. And every thought becomes, if we express it, a word. So who is the word? Ellen White has a nice, very nice expression. She said that Jesus is what? The thought of God made visible. Because what is Jesus? It's the Word. So we can know what God thinks by looking to Jesus. Because it's became the thought of God. Can we see the thoughts of God? Can we see them? We cannot see the thoughts, but we can see what? We can see Jesus, who came and represent Him as God. That's why John says at the beginning was what? The Word. So what is that what gives life? It's the Word. Please let us never forget this. Life to the soul, life to the body is the Word. Keep them in thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh, that is, to all their cells. Okay? Health to all their cells. How much health then is in the Word of God? As heaven is all health. Of course, because heaven is all love. Let us look to Jesus. I like this. He has a discussion in John, you might know that in John 6. You know the story in John 6, where he says something about eating what? He says something about the bread which came down from heaven. And he says in John 6:63, it's one of very, very important thing, and I mean everything that Jesus says, but this is a key text to understand the human structure. He says, it is the Spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth how much? Nothing. So what gives the power? The manna that came from heaven in the wilderness, or the manna that came from heaven in the person of Jesus? You see, he says, it is the Spirit that quickeneth, or that gives us life. In other translation, this is the King James Version, but if you take another translation, it is the Spirit that gives us life. The flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, what are they? They are spirit and life. I mean, how much medicine have we as Christians to do to understand where disease comes from? I mean, the Bible tells it all. But I must confess to you, before I saw it in my patient, I didn't see it in the Bible. But after I saw it in the patient, I said, these things are written in the Bible, and I came, and now the Bible is open to me, to the book of, if you want to know why you are sick, you must know how you are functioning. And there is no other description fitting that you know how you're functioning than it is in the Bible. And there's no description that shows you how to keep yourself and how to function so that you are going to be healthy and alive. So let us return to Proverbs 4:22. For they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their body or all their flesh. It doesn't say only for your kidneys or for your skin or for your eyes. It says for all the flesh. Because how much does the Spirit lead on? Only the brain? Or does He lead on everything that is in our body? So He leads on. He has all the buttons up here in the cortex where He pushes the things. So the verse 23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are what? The issues of life. Now he resumes everything and says, here is the issue of life. Now the question is, do you know where your heart is? That you know what to keep. Because there, where the spirit meets the flesh, where the words gets into the body, there is the heart. That's why it says, keep the words in the midst of thine heart. Because there is the issues of life. But if you don't know where the heart is or how it functions, can you keep it? Yes or no? Can you not? No. Do you think that we know where the heart is? Is there any theological work that you can bring up that shows you that is how the heart functions? Do you have it or not? I haven't. I haven't searched really for, but I guess I would have found it. Someone would have shown it to me, because I was studying a lot during my medical study on theological issues, and I never found a definition of what the heart is. Even though, how could Solomon say, keep your heart, if you'd have no idea what that is? Could he say that? Did Solomon know where the heart is and what to keep? He obviously knew. But do we know it? So this is why I want to finish at this point, and in the next lectures we are going to see where the heart of the human being is, where everything starts. Because thereout are the issues of life. If I search for a cause of disease, I search it in the heart, because there I find it. And believe me, these two patients that I presented to you, and there are many, many, many of them, their issue is from the heart. Their problem is not somewhere in their kidneys or in their lungs or in their blood vessels or in their ears. It is simply in their heart. And if their heart would be kept and so turned that they should not damage their body anymore with the wrong energy, then they would be health and the body would heal. So next lecture will be, what is the heart? How is the heart functioning? So that you might know how you function and how you can correct those things that in the heart are wrong. Thank you so much.